The door closes. The guests are gone. The laughter that filled the room just 30 seconds ago has evaporated. You are standing in the hallway, and your face, the one that was just smiling, charming, and animated, instantly goes slack. It is a terrifying micro-moment, a sudden visceral drop in cabin pressure. Without an audience to reflect your existence back to you, you do not just feel lonely. You feel as if you are physically dissolving, as if the lights in the theater have been cut, and you are realizing there is no script, no character, and perhaps no self at all. This is what I call the vampire loop. You spend 80% of your vital energy curating a version of yourself that is bulletproof, successful, and enviable. You feed this image with likes, compliments, and professional victories. But the moment the external supply of validation is cut off, the internal battery dies. It is an exhausting biological slavery. You are carrying a mask that weighs more than concrete, terrified that if you put it down for even a second, the world will see the trembling child underneath. And worse, you will have to see him too. We often think the solution is to love ourselves more. But in my practice, I have found that trying to polish the ego is exactly what made us sick in the first place. Today, we are going to do something different. We are going to perform deep surgery on the psyche. We will not build a better mask. We will integrate the shadow, the parts of you that you have rejected to survive. There is a way out of this hall of mirrors. And at the end of this video, I will give you a specific clinical protocol, a mirror fast, to help you rewire this neural pathway and finally feel real. Let us step into the diagnostic room. Picture a space lined with infinite mirrors, illuminated by harsh, clinical fluorescent light. It creates no shadows, hides no flaws. In the center stands a person trying on masks, one after another. The lover, the victor, the saint, the victim. This is not just a metaphor. This is the accurate architecture of the modern soul. We are trapped in a room where we are constantly checking our reflection, adjusting the angle, desperate to find a version of ourselves that feels permanent. But the mirrors only show surfaces, and surfaces cannot hold weight. We must revisit the ancient file of Narcissus. We have misunderstood this myth for 2,000 years. We use it to describe someone who loves themselves too much. But if you read Ovid carefully, you see the tragedy. Narcissus did not fall in love with himself. He fell in love with a reflection, an image on the water that could never love him back. He died of thirst right next to the water because he dared not touch it and ripple the image. This is the diagnosis. Narcissism is not self-love. It is a trance state where we sacrifice our real, messy human life to preserve a perfect, dead image. In psychoanalysis, we do not view this false self as a sin or a moral failing. We view it as a cast. Imagine a child whose spirit was broken early on, perhaps by criticism, perhaps by neglect, or even by being praised only for their achievements, not their being. To hold this shattering psyche together, the child constructs a hard, glittering shell. This is the false self. It is the glue holding a fragmented identity from falling apart. When you attack a narcissist's ego, they do not get angry, they get terrified. To them, you are not just insulting them, you are threatening them with total disintegration. If we were to look at the brain of a person locked in this cycle under an MRI, we would not see the warm glow of oxytocin and contentment. We would see a brain on fire. The amygdala, the threat detection center, is hyper-aroused. It is constantly scanning the environment. Do they respect me? Did they see me? Was that a slight? This is not arrogance. This is chronic, high-functioning anxiety. The grandiosity we see on the surface is actually a desperate biological attempt to flood the system with dopamine to numb the pain of an ancient, unhealed wound. The Austrian psychoanalyst Heinz Kohut called this the tragedy of the unmirrored self. If a child looks into their mother's eyes and sees only the mother's expectations, not themselves, they learn a deadly lesson. I do not exist unless I am performing. This rewrites the nervous system. We become adults who are experts at reading the room, but illiterate at reading our own souls. We become chameleons who can be anything the situation demands, except real. We trade authenticity for attachment, and it is the most expensive trade a human being can make. This brings us to a painful paradox. The person who demands the most attention is often the one who feels the most invisible. The loudness of the ego is directly proportional to the silence of the true self. It is a scream for help, disguised as a demand for praise. We build skyscrapers of achievement, curate flawless Instagram feeds, and acquire status symbols, trying to fill a bucket that has a hole in the bottom. No amount of external love can heal an internal hemorrhage. You can pour the whole ocean into that bucket, and it will still be empty. I want you to understand that this is reversible. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, is on our side. But it requires a radical shift. We must move from self-esteem, which is conditional and based on performance, to self-compassion, which is unconditional and based on shared humanity. Later, I will walk you through a practice that forces the brain to disengage from the validation loop. It will feel uncomfortable, like breaking an addiction, but it is the only way to reclaim the energy you are currently burning to keep the mask alive. So here is the question we must answer before we can move forward. It is the question that the false self fights to suppress. If you stripped away the job title, the relationships, the bank account, and the physical appearance, if you were left in that dark room with absolutely no audience to applaud you, who would be left? Why is the person who seems most in love with themselves actually the one who hates themselves the most? Let us descend into the elevator of the psyche and find the answer. Chapter 1. Armor of Achievement. The elevator doors slide shut with a pressurized hiss, sealing us into a world of polished chrome and reinforced glass. We are rising. Through the transparent walls, the city of London expands, a sprawling grid of millions of lives, yet from this height they look like nothing more than data points. I am standing here with James. He is 45, impeccably tailored, and has just finalized a merger that will dominate the headlines tomorrow. By every objective metric of our culture, he has reached the apex. But as we ascend, the air feels thinner. James is looking at his reflection in the metal panel, adjusting a tie that was already perfect. And I can see it in his eyes, the terrifying flickers of a high-functioning void. This is the grandiose defense in its most elegant form. We often mistake men like James for being full of themselves, but that is a diagnostic error. What we are witnessing is not an excess of self, but a frantic attempt to compensate for the absence of one. In the language of the great psychiatrist Dr. Viktor Frankl, this is the existential vacuum disguised as a success story. James has spent decades building a fortress of achievement, but the tragedy of a fortress is that while it keeps the enemies out, it also keeps the occupant a prisoner. He is winning the game, so why do the goalposts feel like they are moving further away with every victory? From the perspective of neurobiology, James is caught on what we call the dopaminergic treadmill. When he closes a deal, his brain's reward system, the ventral striatum, is flooded with dopamine. It's a chemical standing ovation. But the brain is an organ of homeostasis. It hates extremes. Almost instantly, the receptors downregulate. The high evaporates, leaving behind a baseline that feels even lower than before. To get that same feeling of being alive or significant, James needs a bigger deal, a faster car, a more prestigious award. He isn't working for the money anymore. He is working to avoid the withdrawal symptoms of his own ego. I want you to look closely at this grandiose mask. It functions like a biological callus. A callus is thick, tough skin that forms over a site of repeated friction and injury. It's a protective layer, but it has no nerve endings. It is numb. Grandiosity is a psychological callus formed over an ancient shame, usually the shame of a child who was taught that their only value lay in their performance. The thicker the armor James wears, the deeper the injury beneath. He has traded his capacity to feel, to be vulnerable, to be truly seen, for the safety of being admired. But admiration is a poor substitute for love. There is a profound difference between being admired and being loved. Admiration is a transaction. It is based on what you do. It feeds the false self, keeping the vampire loop spinning. Love, however, is an encounter. It is based on who you are in your most unpolished, ordinary state. James has millions of admirers, but he has zero intimacy. Intimacy requires the one thing his ego forbids: the admission of need. To the narcissistic defense, needing someone is a form of death, a surrender of the God complex that keeps the terror of annihilation at bay. He is a prisoner of image, rising in a glass box, visible to everyone, but touched by no one. This is what I call the success paradox. The more you use external validation to prop up a sagging internal identity, the more fragile that identity becomes. It's like trying to build a skyscraper on a foundation of sand by adding more floors to the top. You aren't making it more stable. You are increasing the gravity of the eventual collapse. We see this in the neurocircuitry of status. As Robert Sapolsky has noted, the pursuit of rank and serotonin through dominance is an exhausting biological tax. James isn't thriving, he is surviving at a very high level of overhead. If you find yourself in this glass elevator, constantly checking your metrics, your likes, your status, or your net worth to see if you still exist, understand that you are not broken. You are simply misaligned. You are using a survival strategy that was designed for a child in a trauma state to navigate an adult world that requires connection. You are confusing visibility with presence. Being seen by the world is not the same as being present to yourself. The higher you rise in the false self, the more pressurized the atmosphere becomes, and eventually, the oxygen of genuine joy simply runs out. I have sat with many people like James, people who have everything and feel like nothing. And the path back down to earth, back to the humus or the ground of reality, always begins with a terrifying realization that the game is rigged. You cannot win a game where the rules are designed to keep you running. We must learn to distinguish between the ego, which seeks to be special, and the soul, which seeks to be whole. Specialness is a solitary confinement. Wholeness is a homecoming. We are moving toward a state of radical acceptance, but first we must understand the mechanics of the supply that keeps us addicted to the heights. Chapter 2: Terror of the Void. And then, inevitably, the elevator stops. The doors of that glass tower open, but not to a penthouse view. They open onto a dark, empty theater stage. The applause has died down. The audience has gone home. There is only a single microphone stand under a cold, clinical spotlight, and an overwhelming, ringing silence. This is the moment James, and perhaps you, fears more than failure itself. It is the moment when the external feedback loop is severed, when the world stops telling you who you are. Do you still exist? Or do you flicker out like a hologram when the projector is unplugged? In this silence, we encounter the terrifying mechanics of what psychologists call narcissistic supply. It is a clinical term, but I want you to feel the weight of it. The fragile ego, constructed to hide our shame, has no internal battery. It cannot generate its own sense of value. It is not a sun that burns with its own nuclear fusion. It is a moon, a cold rock that can only shine by reflecting the light of others. When the admiration stops, when the likes dry up, when the phone doesn't ring, the moon goes dark. This is not just loneliness. For the false self, this is an ontological crisis, a threat to existence itself. This parasitic dependence is often disguised as superiority. We think of the narcissist as full of himself, but the paradox is that he is entirely empty of himself. He is full of you, your attention, your praise, your reaction. Without a host to provide this fuel, the parasite begins to starve. This is why the silence of this empty theater feels like violence. The nervous system of a person trapped in the image initiates a panic response. The brain scans the environment for a signal, any signal, that confirms, I am seen, therefore I am. The psychoanalyst Heinz Kohut described this tragedy as the failure of the glint in the mother's eye. If a child is not mirrored, if they are not seen as a person but treated as an extension of the parent or a prop for the family image, they never develop a cohesive self. They remain a collection of fragments held together by external validation. As adults, we try to retroactively fill this void. We perform, we achieve, we curate. But we are pouring water into a bucket with no bottom. The supply leaks out the moment we receive it, and the hunger returns, sharper than before. Have you ever noticed how difficult it is to simply sit in a room and do nothing? Pascal, the French philosopher, famously said that all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. Why is this act so unbearable? Because in solitude, the performer has no function. The mask falls off because there is no one to watch it. And what remains is the thing we have spent a lifetime running from, the raw, unedited reality of our own ordinary humanity. The silence is not empty. It is full of the truths we have suppressed. In this state of withdrawal from supply, the brain enters a specific kind of agony. The default mode network, the part of the brain responsible for self-referential thought, goes into overdrive. It begins to replay past failures, anticipated rejections, and comparative analytics. Why did they look at me that way? Am I falling behind? This is the inner chatter that drives us back to our phones, back to the noise, back to the vampire loop. We would rather be exhausted by the performance than annihilated by the quiet. We choose the exhaustion of the stage over the terror of the void. But here is a spiritual truth that the ego cannot comprehend. You were created to be, not to perform. The obsession with performance is, at its core, a denial of grace. Grace is the theological principle that your value is intrinsic, unearned, and unchangeable. It is the gravity of the spiritual world. It holds you whether you work for it or not. The false self rejects this. It wants to earn its keep. It wants to say, I am worthy because I am special. But grace says, you are worthy because you exist. To the ego, this sounds like an insult. To the soul, it is the only liberation. I know how terrifying it feels to let go of the need to be impressive. It feels like a death, and in a sense, it is. It is the death of the tyrant that has ruled your psyche. We are exploring this anatomy of emptiness not to leave you in despair, but to prepare you for the cure. The silence you fear is actually the medicine you need. Later, in the final chapter, I will give you the mirror fast protocol, a specific practice to help you stand in this silence without collapsing. But first, we must understand the depth of the prison we have built. We must recognize that narcissistic supply is a counterfeit of love. Supply is consumed. Love is shared. Supply is about extraction. Love is about connection. When we use people as mirrors to prop up our self-esteem, we are incapable of seeing them. We objectify them. We turn our partners, our children, and our colleagues into audience members. And the tragedy is that you can be surrounded by a standing ovation and still feel completely, utterly alone. Because the applause is for the mask, not for the trembling child behind it. This isolation is the price of the ticket. You can be special or you can be connected. You cannot be both. Connection requires a level playing field. It requires vulnerability, shared frailty, and the admission that I am just like you. The grandiose self cannot tolerate this equality. It must be above, separate, distinct. And so, it builds a fortress of ice, high on a mountain of achievement. It is impregnable, yes, but it is freezing cold inside. And the oxygen is getting thinner by the minute. Realizing this is the first step toward breaking the solitary confinement of the self. We must stop trying to improve the performance and start questioning the script. We must ask, who wrote these lines? Was it you? Or was it a culture that profits from your insecurity? Was it a parent who needed you to be their trophy? The moment you observe the performance, you are no longer the performer. You become the witness. And the witness is the part of you that is already free, already whole, already connected to the source. But the modern world has added a new, more insidious layer to this theater. We no longer need a physical stage or a corner office to perform. We carry the theater in our pockets. The glass elevator has become a glass screen. We have moved from the analog narcissism of the boardroom to the digital narcissism of the feed. And if James is the prisoner of his status, our next guide, Elena, is the prisoner of her own reflection, digitized, filtered, and sold for parts. As we leave this dark theater, I want you to hold on to this sensation of the void. Don't rush to fill it. Don't check your notifications. Let the discomfort sit there for a moment. It is in this uncomfortable gap between who you pretend to be and who you are that the light of reality finally enters. We are about to step into the digital studio, where the lights are brighter, but the shadows are even darker. Chapter 3: Lost in the Mirror. We step now into the stark, clinical brightness of the digital studio. Here, there are no shadows, only the relentless, unblinking gaze of the ring light. It captures every pore, every hesitation, every micro-expression, promising to broadcast them to a world that is both voyeuristic and indifferent. If James was trapped in the cold isolation of his high-rise office, our next guide, Elena, is trapped here, inside the screen, suspended in a pixelated reality where she is simultaneously the sculptor and the clay. I want you to look closely at this dynamic. Elena is spending hours editing a photograph, smoothing out the texture of her skin, widening her eyes, adjusting the lighting curves. To the untrained eye, this looks like vanity. It looks like self-obsessed narcissism. But as a psychologist, I do not see self-love here. I see terror. I see a person frantically trying to conform to a standard that does not exist in nature, driven by the fear that her unedited self is simply not enough to warrant existence. This phenomenon is what the sociologist Charles Horton Cooley described back in 1902 as the looking-glass self. He argued that our identity is not innate, but a reflection of how we believe others perceive us. We are not who we think we are. We are not who others think we are. We are who we think others think we are. In the digital age, this house of mirrors has become a prison. We have outsourced our self-worth to an algorithm that quantifies human value in likes, shares, and engagement rates. When you entrust your dignity to the metrics of a platform designed to monetize your insecurity, you enter a state of profound spiritual fragility. You begin to curate your life, not to live it, but to document it. The sunset is no longer a cosmic event to be witnessed. It is content to be captured. The coffee with a friend is no longer intimacy. It is a photo opportunity. You cease to be the subject of your own life and become the object of someone else's consumption. This is the essence of digital dysmorphia. It is a dissociation from physical reality. The neurological feedback loop is severed. Your brain knows you are sitting alone in a messy room, feeling anxious. But the digital avatar you have constructed is smiling, successful, and surrounded by beauty. This cognitive dissonance, the gap between the messy biological reality and the pristine digital image, creates a deep, vibrating hum of shame that no amount of validation can silence. We must understand that social media algorithms are not neutral tools. They are sophisticated behavioral modification systems. They weaponize our evolutionary need for tribal belonging. In the Paleolithic era, being ignored by the tribe meant death. Today, when a post fails to get engagement, your ancient mammalian brain interprets it as a signal of exile. It triggers a cortisol spike, a fight or flight response, driving you to perform harder, to shout louder, to become more extreme in your caricature of yourself. If you recognize this exhaustion, this endless loop of polishing a mirror that only reflects your anxiety back to you, I invite you to pause right here. Consider subscribing to this channel. Think of it not as adding more noise to your feed, but as opening a window in that suffocating studio. We are building a space here for the unedited reality, a sanctuary where you can drop the mask and finally breathe. Let us break the algorithm's hold together, one honest conversation at a time. The tragedy of this digital performance is that it requires you to edit out your humanity. You erase the scars, the asymmetry, the aging, the fatigue. Yet in the physics of the soul, it is precisely these cracks that allow connection. As the poet Leonard Cohen reminded us, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. When Elena edits out her flaws, she is sealing the very openings through which love could enter. She makes herself perfect, and in doing so, she makes herself untouchable. Theologically, this is the creation of an idol. An idol is a static, dead image that we worship in place of the living, dynamic truth. When we curate our online personas, we are carving graven images of ourselves. We serve this image. We sacrifice our time and mental health to it. We fear its destruction. But the image is dead. It cannot feel, it cannot love, and it certainly cannot save you. You are pouring your life force into a digital ghost. I have sat with many influencers who have millions of followers, and I can tell you that the loneliness at the top of that digital mountain is paralyzing. They feel like frauds. They know that the audience loves the avatar, not the person. If they were to show their true face, their mourning face, their weeping face, their ordinary face, They fear the audience would leave. And so the prison walls thicken. The more successful the image becomes, the more trapped the human being feels inside it. This is the ultimate paradox of the false self. It promises connection, but it delivers isolation. It promises visibility, but it ensures you remain unseen. You become a brand, a logo, a two-dimensional surface. And the human soul, which is three-dimensional, complex, and contradictory, begins to wither from lack of oxygen. You are starving to death, while everyone tells you how full your banquet table looks. We need to reclaim the right to be ordinary. We need to reclaim the right to be inconsistent, to be offline, to be undocumented. We must remember that you existed before the first like, and you will exist long after the servers shut down. Your value is intrinsic, woven into the very fabric of your consciousness, not contingent on the fickle applause of a digital coliseum. You are not a JPEG. You are a living, breathing mystery. But where does this deep-seated need to be seen, to be admired, to be special come from? It did not start with the smartphone. The smartphone only amplified a frequency that was already broadcasting in the background of our psyche. To understand why Elena, and perhaps you, feel this compulsion to perform, we cannot just look at the screen. We must look further back. We must travel back to the time before the masks were made. The roots of narcissism are not found in the technology of the present, but in the trauma of the past. The performer is often just a bodyguard for a frightened child who learned very early on that love was conditional. In the next chapter, we will leave this digital studio and enter the nursery. We will explore the archaeology of trauma and meet the divine child, the part of you that was sacrificed so the false self could survive. Chapter 4: The Rejected Child. Step with me now out of the harsh fluorescent glare of the digital studio and into a softer yet far more haunting light. We find ourselves in a child's bedroom at night. The air is still, smelling faintly of lavender and old dust. A small nightlight casts long, trembling shadows against the wall. The door is slightly ajar, revealing the silhouette of a parent in the hallway, physically present, yet emotionally light years away. It is here, in this quiet, terrifying gap between the child's need and the parent's inability to respond, that the tragedy begins. We often speak of narcissism as a disease of excess. Too much pride, too much ego, too much noise. But if we look closely at this child waiting in the dark, we see that it is actually a disease of lack. It is a structural failure caused by a specific kind of malnutrition. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung spoke of the divine child archetype, the part of us that is spontaneous, vulnerable, creative, and alive. But in this room, the divine child has learned a brutal lesson. Being real is dangerous. Being ordinary is a fast track to abandonment. The psychological term for this is conditional positive regard. To the developing brain of a child, attachment is not just a desire, it is a biological imperative for survival, as vital as food. If the caregiver only offers love when the child performs, when they are funny, quiet, talented, or pretty, the child makes a catastrophic calculation. They realize, I am not loved for who I am. I am loved for the function I serve. The parent does not see a person, they see a mirror, a narcissistic extension meant to reflect their own worth. This is the moment of the great split. To survive the terror of emotional annihilation, the child performs an act of psychic surgery. They take their true self, the part that cries, fails, needs, and feels uncertainty, and they lock it away in the basement of the subconscious. Jung called this the creation of the shadow. Into the shadow goes everything human, everything soft, everything real. And in its place, the child constructs a shiny, bulletproof avatar, the performer, the golden child, the false self. I want you to understand the depth of this tragedy. The narcissist is not a monster born of malice. They are a construct born of desperation. The grandiose behavior we see in adults, the constant demand for attention, the inability to accept criticism, is simply the fossilized survival strategy of a 4-year-old. It is a scream frozen in time. They are still that child in the bedroom, dancing frantically in the spotlight of the doorway, terrified that if they stop entertaining the parent, the door will close forever. In the field of neurobiology, we know that the brain's circuits for self-regulation are built through co-regulation with a caregiver. When a parent soothes a crying child, they are literally wiring the child's capacity to handle stress. But if the parent is narcissistic, if they are too absorbed in their own drama to tune into the child's frequency, the child is left in a state of chronic hyperarousal. They learn to self-soothe through fantasy, through grandiosity, through imagining they are omnipotent. It is a drug synthesized by the brain to numb the pain of being unseen. This leads to what psychoanalyst Alice Miller famously called the drama of the gifted child. The child becomes an expert at reading the emotional temperature of the room. They become a chameleon, constantly adjusting their personality to meet the unspoken needs of the parent. They lose the ability to ask, "What do I feel?" and replace it with the compulsion to ask, "What do you need me to be?" They save the parent's ego, but in the process, they lose their own soul. And so the divine child withers. The capacity for joy, for intimacy, for simple existence is sacrificed on the altar of the image. The adult who emerges from this room may be successful, charming, and powerful. They may command boardrooms or fill stadiums, but inside they are hollow. They are running on a treadmill of validation, trying to fill a bucket that has a hole in the bottom. They are trying to force the world to give them the unconditional love that was denied in that nursery. It is crucial to look at this without judgment, but with the clinical eye of compassion. The arrogance you see is not strength, it is a scar tissue. The wall of superiority is there to protect the most tender, wounded part of the psyche from ever being hurt again. The narcissist hates their own vulnerability because, in their history, vulnerability meant death. To be weak was to be rejected. To be ordinary was to be invisible. And so they declared war on their own humanity. This is why healing is so terrifying for the narcissist. We are asking them to dismantle the very defense system that saved their life. We are asking them to open the door to the basement and invite the shadow back upstairs. We are asking them to embrace the terrified child they spent a lifetime trying to hide. It feels like suicide. It feels like jumping off a cliff without a parachute. But as we will see, it is the only way to finally hit the ground and find that it is solid. If you recognize this pattern in yourself, this relentless drive to be special, this panic at the thought of being average, know that it is not your fault. It was a necessary adaptation. You built a fortress to survive a winter of the soul. But the winter is over. You are an adult now. The survival mechanism that once saved you is now the cage that imprisons you. It is keeping out the very thing you crave most, real connection. In this shadowy room, the child made a silent vow. I will never be weak again. I will never depend on anyone. I will become so perfect, so powerful, so invulnerable, that no one can ever look through me again. This vow became the blueprint for the adult's life. It laid the foundation for a life lived in defense mode. And as the child grew, so did the walls. They moved from the bedroom to the boardroom, from the nursery to the fortress. But a fortress is a lonely place. It is cold. It is sterile. And while it keeps out pain, it also keeps out life. As we leave this nursery and the memory of the child who wasn't allowed to just be, we must turn our attention to the structure that was built on top of this trauma. We must examine the architecture of the false self in its full, icy maturity. We are heading to the high mountains, to the fortress of solitude, where the ego reigns supreme, safe, and utterly alone. Chapter 5: The Lonely God. And so we arrive at the destination. The frightened child from the nursery has grown up, and the blanket they pulled over their head has evolved into something far more sophisticated. Welcome to the Fortress of Solitude. Picture a castle made of ice, high on a desolate mountain peak. It is architecturally perfect, gleaming in the sun, and completely impregnable. No one can get in to hurt you here. But the air is thin, and the silence is absolute. This is the psychological landscape of the God complex. When we hear this term, we usually imagine someone who thinks they are the creator of the universe. But in clinical psychology, the definition is more subtle and more tragic. The narcissist plays God not out of power, but out of a desperate need to escape the anxiety of being human. To be human is to be contingent, to be dependent, to be vulnerable to loss. To be God is to need nothing. The logic of the fortress is seductive. If I am perfect, I cannot be criticized. If I am self-sufficient, I cannot be abandoned. If I control every variable of my environment, I will never be surprised by pain. It is a closed system designed to eliminate the variable of other people. And for a while, it works. The cortisol levels drop because the threat of rejection is neutralized by the wall. You feel safe. You feel sovereign. But here is the spiritual physics of this architecture. The walls you built to keep out pain also keep out love. There is no selective permeability in the defenses of the ego. When you seal the borders against potential enemies, you also seal them against potential friends. You create a sterile environment where nothing can infect you, but nothing can nourish you either. You become the king of a dead world. This brings us to a fundamental law of neurobiology. Connection requires vulnerability. It is not a poetic sentiment, it is a physiological mechanic. For two nervous systems to resonate, to achieve what scientists call limbic regulation, there must be an opening. My mirror neurons cannot fire in empathy with you if you present me with a mask of perfection. We do not bond with armor, we bounce off it. Think about the people you love most deeply. Do you love them because they are flawless? Or do you love them because you know their cracks, their quirks, their struggles? We bond through shared frailty. This is the pratfall effect in psychology. Competent people become more likable when they make a mistake. Why? Because the mistake signals, I am real, I am like you, it is safe to approach. The narcissist, trapped in their ice fortress, denies this reality. They trade connection for admiration. And this is the terrible bargain. You can be special, or you can be connected. You cannot be both. Specialness, by definition, separates you. It places you above, apart, distinct. Connection requires a level playing field. It requires you to come down from the mountain and stand in the mud with the rest of us. I know how terrifying this sounds. To a person who built a fortress to survive, the idea of lowering the drawbridge feels like a death sentence. It triggers a primal panic. And that is why we are not going to tear the walls down with a sledgehammer today. In the final protocol of this series, I will give you the keys to open the gate from the inside, slowly, safely, on your own terms. We are not here to destroy you. We are here to help you breathe again. Because right now, you are suffocating. The theological definition of pride is not thinking highly of yourself. It is the state of being incurvatus in se, curved inward upon oneself. It is a hell locked from the inside. The tragedy of the fortress is that while you wait for the applause of the world, you are starving for the one thing the audience cannot give you: intimacy. The word itself is the clue. Intimacy. Into me see. But you cannot let anyone see into you if you are terrified of what they will find. You are convinced that if they saw the shivering child behind the ice walls, they would leave. So you maintain the illusion of the emperor. You polish the ice. You sharpen the defenses. You exhaust your dopamine reserves, just keeping the perimeter secure against the threat of being known. Vulnerability comes from the Latin word vulnus, meaning wound. To be vulnerable is to be capable of being wounded. The narcissist's entire life is structured to deny this capacity. I cannot be hurt, they say. But in denying the capacity to be hurt, they deny the capacity to feel anything at all. They achieve invulnerability at the cost of aliveness. They become a statue, beautiful, cold, and stone dead. But the universe has a way of humbling even the strongest stone. Entropy is real. No closed system can sustain itself forever without new energy entering from the outside. The energy you spend maintaining this illusion is finite, and eventually, the winter must end. Eventually, something happens that the fortress cannot withstand. A failure, a loss, a crack in the ice. We are approaching the moment of impact, the moment when the false self collides with reality. It is the moment every narcissist fears most, the nightmare scenario where the mask slips. But I want you to see this not as a tragedy, but as a rescue operation. The walls are about to crumble, and for the first time in years, the light is going to get in. Chapter 6. When the Ego Breaks. And then it happens. The laws of physics assert themselves. Tension cannot increase indefinitely without a release. In engineering, they call it structural failure. In the life of the ego, we call it the collapse. It arrives not as a punishment, but as a correction, a violent realignment with reality. The ice fortress does not melt slowly, it shatters. I want you to stay with me in this moment. Do not look away. We are entering the scene of the accident. For James, our avatar of success, it might be a phone call at 8 p.m. The merger fell through. The younger partner was promoted. Or perhaps it is simpler, a look in the mirror where he suddenly sees not a golden boy, but an aging man with fear in his eyes. The external supply line is cut. The audience has left the building. In clinical terms, we call this a narcissistic injury. But that term is too mild. It implies a bruise. For the narcissist, this is not a bruise. It is an amputation. When your entire existence is built on the reflection in the mirror, the shattering of that mirror feels like physical death. This is why the pain is so disproportionate. A healthy person loses a job and thinks, I have a problem. The narcissist loses a job and thinks, I am nothing. The distinction between doing and being has been erased, so a failure of competence is experienced as the annihilation of the self. The brain's prediction error signal goes off the charts. The map of reality no longer matches the territory. I know this terror. It is the cold sweat at 3 a.m. when the narrative you have told yourself for 20 years simply stops working. You feel the ground opening up beneath you. This is what the mystics called the dark night of the soul. But the alchemists had a more precise term, nigredo, the blackening. In the ancient alchemical tradition, nigredo was the first and most critical stage of the great work. It is the process of putrefaction, decomposition, and burning. Before the base metal can be transformed into gold, the old form must be utterly destroyed. It must rot. To the ego, this looks like a catastrophe. To the soul, it is the beginning of the work. You have spent your life avoiding this blackness. You built the fortress. You chased the awards. You curated the profile, all to stay out of the nigredo. But here is the spiritual physics. You cannot be reborn if you refuse to die. The seed must break its shell and be buried in the dark earth before it can become a tree. The shell is your false self. The breaking is this pain. So James sits in his corner office. The city lights of London are still beautiful, but they no longer reflect him. They are just lights. He is just a man. The silence rushes in, deafening and heavy. For the first time, there is no applause to drown out the beating of his own heart. The terror is absolute. But look closely. He is still breathing. The world has not ended. This is the great secret that the ego hides from you. You survive the collapse. The mask falls off, and underneath it, there is still a face. It is not the face of a god or a hero. It is the face of a human being, vulnerable, frightened, ordinary. And this is the moment of potential grace. The German philosopher Martin Heidegger spoke of Angst, anxiety, not as a pathology, but as a moment of lucidity. In anxiety, the trivialities of the they-self, the social conformist, fall away, and we are confronted with the raw fact of our existence. This collapse strips you of everything that was not you anyway. If you are in this place right now, amidst the shards of a broken relationship, a failed career, or a shattered reputation, I ask you to do the unthinkable. Do not try to fix the mirror. Do not rush to glue the pieces back together with new achievements or new distractions. Let it lie broken on the floor. This pain is not evidence that you are unlovable. It is evidence that the idol you worshipped was too small for your soul. You were trying to squeeze the infinite into a finite image, and the pressure finally blew the container apart. The worst thing that could happen to your ego has happened, and you are still here. Now we have a chance. Now that the noise of maintaining the image has stopped, we can finally hear something else. We can move from the frantic defense of a phantom to the quiet acceptance of reality. The mirror is broken. Good. Now, for the first time, you can look through the frame and see the world. The path forward is not a climb back up to the peak of greatness. It is a descent. We are going down into the valley, into the rich, dark soil of reality. We are going to learn the most forbidden art of all, the art of being ordinary. We are going to learn humility. Chapter 7. Power of being ordinary. Look at this garden. The stones are covered in moss, the wood is weathered, and the path is uneven. In the Japanese aesthetic of wabi-sabi, this imperfection is not a mistake to be fixed. It is the very soul of beauty. It is beautiful precisely because it is humble, temporal, and real. This is where we land after the glass fortress of the ego shatters. We do not land in a pit of despair. We land on the earth. For so long I believed, perhaps as you do now, that to be ordinary was a fate worse than death. We ran from the average as if it were a burning building. We built elaborate personas, achieved impossible goals, and curated flawless images just to prove that we were special. But specialness is the most solitary confinement cell in existence. It separates you from the human race. The cure for this isolation is a word that often tastes bitter to the modern tongue: humility. But let us strip this word of its moralistic, shaming connotations. The word humility comes from the Latin humus, meaning earth or soil. It does not mean thinking less of yourself. It means being grounded. It means understanding your actual size in the cosmos. Not a god, not a worm, but a human being. When we are in the grip of the false self, we are suffering from inflation, a psychological term for being pumped full of hot air, floating above reality, terrified of popping. Humility is simply the gravity that brings us back down to solid ground. And when your feet are on the ground, you can no longer fall. I want you to feel the relief of that statement. You can no longer fall. But to stand on this ground, we must perform a difficult surgery. We must integrate the shadow. The psychiatrist Carl Gustav Jung taught us that the shadow is not just the evil inside us. It is everything we had to amputate to be loved. The envy we felt towards a sibling, the rage at a parent, the weakness we were told to hide. We locked these parts in the basement and spent all our energy guarding the door. The narcissist, and the narcissist in me, believes that if anyone saw these dark parts, they would leave. So we present the mask. But here is the spiritual physics of the situation. You cannot be loved for your mask. When people applaud your image, the you behind the mask feels nothing but imposter syndrome, because you know they are applauding a lie. True healing begins when we unlock the basement door. We invite the shadow up for tea. We look at our envy, our pettiness, our neediness, and instead of whipping ourselves, we say, I see you. You are part of me too. This is integration. It is the moment the civil war inside your psyche ends. You stop trying to be a two-dimensional angel and accept the three-dimensional reality of your nature. This acceptance creates a biological shift. The brain stops scanning for threats. The amygdala cools down. You no longer need to calculate every word to ensure it sounds intelligent. You no longer need to angle your face to hide the asymmetry. The energy you use to maintain the lie is suddenly released, returned to you as vitality and presence. There is a profound theological truth here, one that transcends all dogmas. Grace, that feeling of unconditional acceptance, acts like water. It always flows to the lowest point. If you are standing high on the mountain of your pride, grace cannot reach you. You remain dry and thirsty. But if you descend into the valley of your humility, the water rushes in. I have found that this is the paradox of our existence. We are loved precisely in our brokenness, not despite it. It is our cracks that allow us to connect with others. When you meet someone who has no cracks, you can admire them, but you cannot bond with them. We bond through shared frailty. Vulnerability is the biological prerequisite for connection. So here is the new truth to replace the old lie. You are not special. And thank God for that. Because if you were special, you would have to maintain that specialness every second of every day. Instead, you are real. You are part of the common fabric of humanity. You have the right to be tired, to be wrong, to be unnoticed. This is not resignation, it is liberation. It is the freedom to walk into a room and not worry about being the smartest or the most attractive person there. It is the freedom to listen instead of perform. It is the freedom to simply be. And in that state of being, we find something far more intoxicating than applause. We find peace. This peace is not an abstract concept. It is something we must practice physically and mentally in the small, invisible moments of our day. We must learn to inhabit our lives again, not as actors on a stage, but as living, breathing creatures. As we leave the garden and step back into the house of our daily life, we need to see what this looks like in practice. How does a person who has shattered their mirror actually drink a cup of coffee? How do they wake up? Let us look at Elena, not as an avatar of vanity, but as a woman learning to live for the first time. Chapter 8. Joy of Being Unseen. And now, we arrive at the most terrifying location of all. It is not a dungeon, nor a shattered fortress. It is a kitchen table, bathed in the soft, unforgiving light of a Tuesday morning. There is no applause here. There is no audience. There is only a ceramic cup of coffee and the deafening silence of ordinary life. For the personality addicted to the high voltage of validation, this silence does not feel like peace. It feels like a funeral. Here lies the final, desperate question of the false self. If I watch a sunset and no one knows I saw it, was it beautiful? If I drink this coffee without broadcasting its aesthetic perfection to the digital tribe, do I even exist? We have become like the philosopher's tree falling in the forest, terrified that without an external observer, our very being will dissolve into nothingness. This is where the true work of healing begins. It is not in the dramatic crash, but in the quiet reconstruction of reality. We must understand the neurobiology of this moment. When Elena sits there, her hand hovering over her phone, her brain is screaming for a dopaminergic hit. It wants to convert this private moment into public currency. To resist this impulse is not merely a habit change, it is a spiritual detox. It is the reclamation of the soul from the marketplace. We call this shift metanoia, a fundamental rewiring of the mind's intent. For years, the narcissist's navigational system has been locked on one coordinate: how do I look? Now, we must manually force the wheel to turn toward a new coordinate. What is this? It is a shift from being the object of attention to being the subject of experience. It is the radical decision to inhabit your life instead of curating it. Consider the biology of empathy. It is the neurological opposite of narcissism. When we are trapped in the hall of mirrors, our mirror neurons are dormant, or firing only to assess threats to our status. But when we stop performing, these circuits wake up. We begin to feel the texture of the ceramic, the warmth of the liquid, the reality of the world outside our head. We move from a closed loop of self-reference to an open system of connection. Elena puts the phone face down on the table. The screen goes black. In that micro moment, 1,000 invisible strings are cut. She lifts the cup. She does not pose with it. She drinks. The coffee is bitter, hot, and undeniably real. For the first time in years, she is not watching herself drink. She is simply drinking. The observer and the actor have merged. This is what the mystics call presence, and what psychologists call integration. I want to invite you into this space of quiet rebellion right now. Look away from the screen for a moment. Find a simple object near you, a cup, a pen, the texture of your own chair. Can you appreciate it just for what it is, without needing to tell anyone about it? In the comments below, I ask you to share one thing you are grateful for today that has absolutely nothing to do with your achievements, your image, or how others perceive you. Let us build a record of the real, not the curated. This practice of private gratitude is the antidote to the poison of performative happiness. When you find joy in a moment that is yours and yours alone, you are rebuilding the internal battery that the false self depleted. You are proving to your subconscious that your worth is not a stock price that fluctuates with public opinion. Your worth is an inherent property of your existence, immutable and silent. I know how difficult this sounds. To the modern mind, anonymity feels like death. The ego fights this simplicity with every weapon it has, whispering that you are disappearing, that you are becoming irrelevant. If you feel this panic rising, do not be alarmed. It is a symptom of withdrawal from the drug of external validation. It means the medicine is working. We are walking a fine line here, and I do not expect you to master this transition overnight. The neural pathways of vanity are deep and well-worn. That is why, in the final chapter of this series, I will give you the specific mirror-fast protocol, a 3-day structural tool to help you navigate this withdrawal safely. But for now, we simply need to sit at the table. There is a profound freedom in being nobody in particular. When you are no longer maintaining the weight of a marble statue, you can move, you can breathe, you can connect. The energy you used to burn on image management is now available for creativity, for deep work, and for love. You realize that the walls of the fortress didn't just keep pain out, they kept life out. The great irony of the narcissist's journey is that they spent their life trying to be extraordinary to avoid being ordinary, only to discover that the ordinary was where the magic was hiding all along. The smell of rain, the sound of a loved one's breath, the taste of coffee. These are not minor details. They are the substance of the universe. They are the bread of life. As Elena sits there, the morning sun hits her face. She doesn't check the lighting. She doesn't look for a filter. She just feels the warmth. And in that warmth, the ice around her heart, the ice of the lonely, grandiose child, begins to melt. She is no longer a product to be consumed. She is a living soul, participating in the morning. But this newfound peace is fragile. The world is loud, and the sirens of the ego are persistent. How do we take this quiet epiphany and turn it into a permanent state of being? How do we walk out of this kitchen and into a world that demands we sell ourselves? We must now take the final step, integration. We must learn to look at the vast horizon without blinking. Chapter 9. Freedom to just be. And so, we move from the quiet intimacy of a kitchen table to the vastness of an open horizon. James stands there now, watching the first stars puncture the dusk. The silence here is different. It is not the terrifying silence of an empty theater, waiting for applause that never comes. It is the ancient, indifferent silence of the cosmos. For the first time in his life, he does not feel the need to fill it. We have walked a long road together in this hour. We have diagnosed the false self not as a monster, but as a frightened child wearing heavy armor. We have seen how the dopamine loops of digital validation and the exhaustion of the God complex drain our vitality. We realized that the pursuit of being special is actually a flight from the terror of being real. The tragic irony of the narcissist is that they build a tower to heaven to escape their own humanity, only to find that the divine was waiting for them in the basement all along, in the humility of the ordinary earth. This is the final truth we must integrate. Healing does not mean building a better, more spiritual ego. Healing means allowing the ego to collapse so the soul can finally breathe. Look at the stars or the ocean. This is the antidote. Neurobiologists call the state James is experiencing self-diminishment, a positive psychological phenomenon where the default mode network, the part of the brain obsessed with me, goes quiet in the presence of something vast. When you stand before the infinite, your need to be the center of the universe vanishes. You feel small, yes, but for the first time, you feel safe. But an insight is not a cure. The neural pathways of vanity are thick and insulated. They will try to rebuild the fortress the moment you return to your routine. To make this liberation permanent, we need a protocol. We need to physically starve the false self of its supply. I am giving you a prescription for the next 3 days. I call it the mirror fast. The protocol is simple, yet it will feel like a withdrawal. For 72 hours, I ask you to engage in radical, active listening. Here is the rule. In every conversation you have, with your partner, a colleague, or a barista, you must act as if you do not exist. Treat your ego as a ghost that cannot speak. Do not steer the topic back to your life. Do not prepare your response while they are talking. This is a neurological detox. When you stop scanning the conversation for opportunities to validate yourself, you activate the mirror neurons in your brain, the hardware of empathy. You shift from broadcasting to receiving. You will feel an urge, almost a panic, to insert yourself, to say, "I did that too," or "I know that." Resist it. Let that urge burn up. That burning is the death of the narcissist. By the 3rd day, something profound will shift. You will discover that you don't need to be seen to exist. You will realize that connection is not about extracting value from others like a vampire, but about resonating with them. You will find that the less space you take up in the room, the more space you have in your heart. Look at James one last time. He is no longer the titan of industry trying to consume the world. He is a witness to it. The anxiety of maintaining the illusion is gone. He accepts that he is temporary, that he is flawed, and that he is just one small note in a magnificent symphony. And in that acceptance, he finds the dignity he chased for 40 years. If this journey into the architecture of the self has given you a key to your own prison, I invite you to remain in this space with us. Subscribe, not to consume more content, but to build a consistent practice of awareness. Let us continue to explore these laws of the soul together, supporting each other as we walk the path from the mask to the mirror. You are not your image. You are not your achievements. You are not the applause, and you are not the silence that follows it. You are the awareness that loves. You are the capacity to see the sunset, not the object obstructing the view. Go now. Be ordinary. Be vulnerable. Be free.